Growing up as the youngest in the Morrison family meant I was always treated like the family afterthought. While my brother Jake got praised for every minor achievement, I was consistently dismissed as the quiet one who would never amount to much. My parents had a way of making me feel invisible, especially when it came to anything important. The pattern started early. When Jake graduated high school with C's, they threw him a party. When I graduated valedictorian 3 years later, they said congratulations and moved on to discussing Jake's latest job prospects. When Jake got his first apartment, they helped him move and bought him furniture. When I bought my first house at 25, they said it was probably too much responsibility for someone my age. That house became my sanctuary. It was a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, nothing flashy, but it was mine. I'd saved every penny from my government job, working extra shifts and living frugally to make the down payment. The day I got the keys, I called to share the news with my family. "You bought a house?" Mom had sounded skeptical. "Are you sure you can afford the payments?" "It's a good investment," I'd replied, trying to keep the excitement in my voice. "Investment?" Jake had laughed in the background. "She can barely afford car insurance. This is going to end badly." Dad had taken the phone. "Honey, maybe you should have talked to us first. Houses are a big responsibility. What if something breaks? What if you lose your job?" I'd hung up feeling deflated. Even my biggest achievement was treated like a mistake waiting to happen. Over the next few years, the house became a source of ongoing family commentary. Every family gathering included some reference to my expensive mistake, or questions about whether I was keeping up with the payments. Jake particularly enjoyed making jokes about my mortgage chains and how I was tied down to a depreciating asset. "Smart people rent," he'd announce at family dinners. "Flexibility is everything. Sarah's stuck with that house whether she likes it or not." The comments stung, but I'd learned not to react. I'd just smile and change the subject. Meanwhile, Jake bounced between jobs and apartments, always asking our parents for money to cover rent or security deposits. But somehow his financial instability was seen as exploring options, while my stable homeownership was viewed as limiting myself. The real problem started last summer when I accepted a temporary assignment overseas. The government position required me to spend 6 months in Eastern Europe, working on what I could only describe to my family as administrative oversight. The details were classified, but the work was important and the pay was excellent. Before leaving, I made all the arrangements for my house. I set up automatic payments for utilities, arranged for lawn care, and installed a comprehensive security system. I also gave my parents emergency contact information and a spare key, purely for genuine emergencies like burst pipes or break-ins. Just in case something catastrophic happens, I'd explain during the handover. Otherwise, the house should take care of itself. Jake had rolled his eyes. "Look at her, preparing for her little house like it's a historic landmark." "It's just a basic suburban house, Sarah." "A basic house she can't really afford," Mom had added with a sigh. I'd bitten my tongue and finished the security briefing. Before boarding my flight, I'd reminded them one more time that the key was only for emergencies. The work overseas was intense and consuming. I was deep in financial investigations that required my complete attention, tracking complex networks that crossed multiple countries. The days were long and communication with home was limited due to security protocols. I'd managed to check in with my family a few times, brief conversations where everyone assured me everything was fine. "House is still standing," Jake had joked during one call. "No disasters yet." I'd relaxed, focusing on my work. The investigation was reaching a critical phase, and I was coordinating with international law enforcement on several high-priority cases. My expertise in financial crimes had made me an essential part of the team, and the work was some of the most important of my career. The assignment was supposed to end in March, but complications arose that required my expertise for an additional month. I'd sent a message to my family explaining the extension, and everyone seemed fine with the news. "Take all the time you need," Dad had written back. "We're managing everything here." What I didn't know was that Jake had been watching my house for months, noticing that I never returned, never visited, never seemed to check on the property. In his mind, this confirmed what he'd always believed. I was in over my head, probably struggling financially and too proud to admit I needed help. The first sign of trouble came through my secure communication channel. My supervisor pulled me aside during what was supposed to be my final week overseas. "We've got an unusual situation," Agent Martinez had said, holding a classified report. "There's been some activity at your registered address. Nothing threatening, but it's flagged in our monitoring systems." My blood ran cold. What kind of activity? Property transaction. Someone filed paperwork claiming ownership transfer. It's probably nothing, but given your security clearance and current assignment, we need to investigate any irregularities. I'd stared at the report, not understanding. That's impossible. I own that house. There's no transaction. That's why it's flagged as suspicious. Real estate fraud is sometimes used to compromise federal employees. We're treating this as a potential security threat until we know more. The flight home was a nightmare. I couldn't contact my family due to operational security, and I couldn't get details about what had happened to my house. All I knew was that somehow someone had filed paperwork claiming they'd purchased my property, and federal investigators were now involved. I landed on a Tuesday morning and drove straight home. The house looked normal from the outside, but there was a lockbox on the front door and a "sold" sign on the lawn. My key didn't work. My hands shaking, I called the number on the real estate sign. "Morrison Property Services," a cheerful voice answered. "This is Sarah Morrison. Someone put a "sold" sign on my house and I need to know what's happening." There was a pause. "Oh, you must be the sister. Jake told us you might call. He explained that you'd been struggling with the payments and finally agreed to let him handle the sale. Congratulations on getting out from under that mortgage." My stomach dropped. "Jake Morrison is my brother and he doesn't own this house." "I do. Ma'am, I have all the paperwork right here." Jake Morrison presented power of attorney documents and a deed showing his ownership. "He said you'd been overseas and unable to handle the transaction yourself. The sale closed last week." I hung up and immediately called my parents' house. "Sarah." Mom sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. "You're back. How was your trip? Where's Jake? I need to talk to him right now." "He's here. We're actually having a little celebration dinner. Jake made such a smart business decision and we're so proud of him." "Put him on the phone. Now." Jake's voice came through, cocky and amused. "Hey sis. Welcome back to reality. What did you do to my house?" "I solved your problem. You were clearly in over your head, gone for months, probably behind on payments. I found a buyer, handled the paperwork and got you out of that financial mess. You should be thanking me. That wasn't your house to sell." "Sarah, honey," Dad's voice cut in on speakerphone. "Jake showed us all the financial documents. You were 3 months behind on payments. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. Jake saved your credit rating." I felt like I was losing my mind. "That's impossible. All my payments are automatic. I haven't missed a single payment in 3 years." "The bank records don't lie," Jake said smugly. "Look, I know this is embarrassing, but I handled it quietly. The buyer was willing to take over the debt and pay you a small amount to walk away. You actually made $15,000 after all the fees." "Where's my $15,000? "I deposited it in your account minus the money you owed me for handling everything." "But that's not the point. The point is you're free now. No more house payments you couldn't afford." I was hyperventilating. "Jake, I need you to listen very carefully. I never missed a payment. I never gave you permission to sell my house. And I never signed any power of attorney." "Sarah, we have your signature on all the documents," Mom interjected gently. "Maybe the stress of that job overseas affected your memory." That's when I realized what had happened. Jake had forged my signature, probably using documents he'd seen over the years. He'd somehow convinced a real estate agent and a title company that he had the right to sell my house, and my family believed his story about missed payments. But what Jake didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my house wasn't just any property. Due to my security clearance and the sensitive nature of my work, I'd been required to register my address with federal authorities. My property was monitored as part of national security protocols, and any unauthorized transactions would trigger immediate investigation. "I need to come over," I said quietly. "We need to discuss this in person." "Of course," Dad said warmly. "Come celebrate with us. Jake's already talking about investing your portion in his new business venture." I drove to my childhood home in a daze. The familiar living room was decorated like a party with a "Congratulations, Jake" banner hanging over the fireplace. My brother was holding court in Dad's recliner, telling the story of how he'd rescued me from financial disaster. "And the best part," Jake was saying as I walked in, "is that she doesn't have to worry about property taxes or maintenance anymore. I basically gave her back her freedom." "There she is." Mom hugged me tightly. "We're so proud of Jake for looking out for you." I looked around the room at my family's happy faces. They genuinely believed Jake had done something wonderful. In their minds, I was the irresponsible younger sister who'd gotten in over her head, and Jake was the hero who'd cleaned up my mess. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, sitting down across from Jake. "It's pretty simple," Jake began, clearly enjoying the attention. "I noticed you never came back to check on the house. Neighbors mentioned they hadn't seen you in months. I drove by and saw the lawn was getting overgrown despite the service, mail was piling up despite forwarding, and the place looked abandoned. So I did some digging," he continued proudly. "Called the mortgage company pretending to be worried about my sister. They confirmed you were behind on payments. 3 months, Sarah. 3 full months. This was impossible. I knew my automatic payments were working. I checked my accounts regularly, even from overseas. So I went to the bank," Jake continued. "Explained the situation. They said foreclosure proceedings had started, and the property would go to auction within 60 days. That's when I knew I had to step in." "How did you get the legal right to sell?" I asked carefully. Jake pulled out a folder of documents. "Power of attorney. Lucky thing you signed this before you left for your mysterious job." He handed me a document with my signature at the bottom. The signature looked perfect, too perfect. Jake had always been good at forgery, a skill he'd used in high school to sign his own report cards. "I don't remember signing this," I said quietly. "You signed it the day before you left," Jake said confidently. "You said it was in case of emergencies. Don't you remember? You were really stressed about leaving the house." The room full of family members nodded sympathetically. In their version of events, I'd been overwhelmed and Jake had stepped up to help. "The buyer was great," Jake continued. "A nice young couple, first-time homeowners. They were pre-approved for the full amount and willing to close quickly. Honestly, Sarah, you should see how happy they are. They're planning to start a family in your old house." "And you handled all the paperwork?" I asked. "Everything. Title transfer, mortgage payoff, even coordinated with the real estate agent. I saved you thousands in commission by finding the buyers myself." Jake was beaming with pride. "Sold your little house for $300,000, he announced dramatically, clearly having practiced this moment. The family burst into applause. "Finally making smart decisions." Mom cheered. I said nothing and smiled, my mind racing. Jake had no idea what he'd actually done. He thought he'd sold a simple suburban house, but he'd actually illegally transferred federal property under active security monitoring. My phone buzzed with a secure message. "Agent Martinez, need immediate debrief. Federal crime reported at your address. Are you secure?" I typed back, "Secure. Family gathering. Will call within hour." "Everything okay?" Dad asked, noticing my phone. "Just work," I said calmly. "Jake, can you tell me the buyers' names? I want to send them a welcome card." "David and Michelle Parker. Sweet couple, probably mid-20s. They're so excited about their first house." Jake was clearly proud of his matchmaking. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. "Hello. Is this Sarah Morrison?" The voice was panicked, almost screaming. "Yes, who is this?" "This is James Wheeler from Wheeler and Associates Law Firm. We represented the Parker family in the purchase of your property." I walked into the kitchen for privacy. "What can I help you with, Mr. Wheeler?" "Why are FBI agents at our office?" he shouted into the phone. "They have a warrant for all documents related to the Morrison property sale. They're saying the transaction was fraudulent and potentially involves national security violations." I could hear the family in the living room, still laughing and celebrating Jake's business success. "Mr. Wheeler, I need you to listen carefully," I said quietly. "I never authorized the sale of my house. My brother forged my signature and illegally transferred federal property." "What?" "But he had power of attorney documents. He had your signature. Those documents are forged. The signature is fake." And Mr. Wheeler, my property is registered with federal authorities due to my security clearance. Any unauthorized transaction triggers an automatic investigation. There was silence on the other end, then the sound of papers rustling frantically. "Oh God," Wheeler whispered. "The FBI agents are asking about wire fraud, identity theft, and something about federal property protection statutes. They want to know if we verified the power of attorney documents." "Did you?" We accepted them in good faith. Your brother seemed legitimate and the signature looked authentic." I could hear shouting in the background of Wheeler's office. "Mr. Wheeler, I need to ask you something important. Are the Parker family in your office right now?" "Yes, they're here trying to understand why federal agents are confiscating all their closing documents. Tell them I'm very sorry, but they were victims of fraud. The sale was illegal and they need to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. But they spent their life savings. They took out a mortgage. They've already moved in. The FBI will handle the financial recovery process. Right now, everyone needs to focus on cooperating with federal investigators." I hung up and walked back to the living room where Jake was still holding court. "Who was that?" Mom asked. "The buyer's lawyer," I said calmly. Jake perked up with interest. "Everything okay? No problems with the closing, I hope." I sat down and looked at my brother. "Jake, I need you to understand something very important. My house wasn't just any property. Due to my job and security clearance, it's registered with federal authorities. Any unauthorized transaction triggers automatic investigation." Jake laughed. "Come on, Sarah. It's just a regular house in a regular neighborhood. Don't be so dramatic. The FBI is currently confiscating all documents related to the sale," I said quietly. "They're treating this as wire fraud, identity theft, and illegal transfer of federal property." The room went silent. "That's ridiculous," Dad said after a moment. "Jake was helping you out of a bad situation." "There was no bad situation. I never missed a payment. I never signed a power of attorney. And I never gave anyone permission to sell my house." Jake's confidence was starting to crack. "But the bank confirmed you were behind on payments." "Jake, did you actually speak to my mortgage company, or did you call a different number?" His face went pale. "I called the number I found online." "What name did you give them?" "I said I was Jake Morrison, your brother, and I was concerned about your property." I nodded slowly. "And they gave you detailed financial information about my mortgage over the phone, based on nothing more than sharing my last name?" The room was getting uncomfortable. Family members were starting to look confused. "The signature on the power of attorney," I continued. "Can you tell me when and where I supposedly signed it?" "The day before you left. In your kitchen." "Jake, I left from the airport directly from my office. I never went home that day. And I certainly never signed any legal documents giving you control of my property." My phone started ringing. "Agent Martinez." "Excuse me," I said, stepping onto the back porch. "This is Sarah Morrison." "Agent Morrison, we need you to come in immediately. We've got a federal crime scene at your property address, and we need your full debrief on the security implications. My brother is here with my family. He believes he was helping me by selling the house. Your brother committed wire fraud, identity theft, and illegal transfer of federal property. The buyers are victims, the real estate professionals are potential accomplices, and your family property is now evidence in a federal investigation. What happens next? We're executing arrest warrants within the hour. Your brother needs to be taken into custody before he has a chance to destroy evidence or flee. Can you keep him at your current location? He doesn't know he's committed a crime. He thinks he was helping me. Agent Morrison, your brother forged federal documents and illegally transferred government-monitored property. His intentions are irrelevant to the charges." I hung up and walked back inside. The mood in the living room had shifted. Jake was frantically looking through his folder of documents, and my parents were asking questions he couldn't answer. "Sarah," Mom said when I sat down, "Jake says the mortgage company told him you were behind on payments, but he can't remember exactly who he spoke to or when. And the power of attorney," Dad added, "Jake says you signed it in your kitchen, but you said you left from your office." Jake was sweating now. "Look, maybe I'm remembering some details wrong, but the important thing is I helped Sarah get out of a bad situation." "What bad situation?" I asked gently. My mortgage payments were automatic and current. I never asked for help. And I certainly never signed any documents giving you legal control of my property. But the foreclosure notices. Jake started then stopped. What foreclosure notices? I saw them in your mailbox. Jake, I had mail forwarding set up before I left. All my mail was being sent to a secure federal facility. There was no mail in my mailbox. The room was silent except for the sound of Jake's papers rustling as he frantically searched through the documents. Maybe there was some confusion, Mom said hopefully. Maybe Jake misunderstood the situation but was trying to help. The problem, I said carefully, is that Jake forged my signature on legal documents and illegally sold federal property. Even if his intentions were good, those are serious federal crimes. Jake stood up suddenly. This is insane. It's just a house. A regular house in suburbia. There's nothing federal about it. My security clearance requires registration of my primary residence with federal authorities, I explained. Any unauthorized transaction triggers automatic investigation. Security clearance for what? Dad asked. You said you worked in administrative oversight. I looked around the room at my family's confused faces. I work in financial crimes investigation. International money laundering, terrorism funding, organized crime networks. My property is monitored as part of national security protocols. Jake sat down hard. You're serious? The buyer's lawyer just called because FBI agents are confiscating all closing documents. The buyers spent their life savings on a house they can't legally own because the sale was fraudulent. But I have power of attorney, Jake said weakly. You forged power of attorney. The signature is fake, Jake. We both know you've always been good at copying signatures. My phone buzzed with another secure message. Federal agents en route. 10 minutes. I looked at Jake, who was starting to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. Jake, federal agents are going to be here very soon. They're going to arrest you for wire fraud, identity theft, and illegal transfer of federal property. You need to cooperate fully and get a lawyer immediately. Arrest. Mom gasped. But he was trying to help. Mom, Jake forged my signature and illegally sold my house. The fact that he thought he was helping doesn't change the crimes he committed. Jake was staring at the documents in his folder, probably seeing them clearly for the first time. The forged power of attorney. The fake mortgage default notices he'd created to justify his actions. The identity theft he'd committed by impersonating me to the buyers. I didn't mean for this to happen, he whispered. I know, I said gently. But it did happen. You stole a $300,000 asset and sold it without permission. That's a federal crime regardless of your intentions. Car doors slammed outside. Through the front window I could see unmarked black SUVs pulling into the driveway. Sarah Morrison? A voice called from the front door. In here, I called back. 4 FBI agents entered the living room, badges displayed. Agent Martinez nodded at me professionally. Agent Morrison, he said formally. Is this the subject? I looked at Jake, who had gone completely pale. This is my brother Jake Morrison. He's the one who forged the documents and executed the illegal property transfer. Jake Morrison, Agent Martinez announced. You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and illegal transfer of federal property. The handcuffs clicked shut around Jake's wrists as the agents read him his rights. My parents were crying, asking if this was really necessary. Couldn't there be some misunderstanding? Ma'am, Agent Martinez explained to my mother, your son committed multiple federal felonies. He forged government documents and illegally transferred property under federal monitoring. This is a national security issue. As they led Jake to the car, he looked back at me with a mixture of confusion and betrayal. I was trying to help you, he said. I know, I replied. But you committed serious crimes in the process. After the agents left with Jake, I sat with my parents in the suddenly quiet living room. The "Congratulations, Jake" banner looked absurd hanging over the fireplace. What happens now? Dad asked. Jake will be processed and charged. He'll need a good lawyer and will probably face several years in federal prison. The buyers will get their money back through the Federal Victim Recovery Program, but their dream of homeownership is ruined. The real estate professionals who facilitated the fraud will face investigation and potential charges. And you? I get my house back eventually. after it's processed as evidence in a federal investigation. Mom was crying quietly. How did this happen? Jake really thought he was helping you. Jake saw what he wanted to see. He convinced himself I was failing financially because that fit his image of me as the incompetent younger sister. Instead of asking questions or talking to me directly, he committed multiple felonies based on assumptions. Over the following weeks, the full scope of Jake's crimes became clear. He'd created fake mortgage default notices by copying letterheads from online images. He'd practiced my signature for months, perfecting it until even I had trouble telling the forgeries from authentic samples. He'd researched power of attorney laws and created documents that looked legitimate to anyone who didn't verify them carefully. The real estate agent and title company faced investigation for failing to properly verify the documentation. The buyers, David and Michelle Parker, were traumatized by the experience of having federal agents seize their dream home, but they cooperated fully with the investigation and eventually received full restitution. Jake was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. During the sentencing hearing, he finally acknowledged the scope of what he'd done. I convinced myself Sarah was in trouble and I was helping her, he told the judge. But the truth is, I never respected her success. I assumed she was failing because I couldn't accept that my younger sister was more successful than me. My crimes weren't about helping anyone. They were about maintaining my image as the responsible older brother. The hardest part wasn't Jake's imprisonment or the legal proceedings. It was the family conversations afterward, when my parents slowly came to understand that their perception of me as the irresponsible child was completely wrong. I'd been successful, stable, and competent all along. They'd just been unable to see it because it didn't match their assumptions. We failed you, Dad said during one difficult conversation. We treated you like you were incapable when you were the most capable person in the family. You believed what Jake told you, I said. He's very convincing when he wants to be. But we should have known better. We should have known you better. I moved back into my house 6 months later, after it was released from evidence. The security systems had been upgraded and federal monitoring was now even more comprehensive. Jake's crime had actually resulted in enhanced protection for my property. The experience taught me something important about family dynamics and assumptions. My relatives had been so invested in seeing me as the family failure that they'd accepted an elaborate criminal conspiracy rather than questioning their beliefs about my competence. Jake served his full sentence and was released on parole. We've had limited contact since then. He's working as a warehouse employee and living in a supervised halfway house. The federal conviction destroyed his credit, his career prospects, and his reputation in our hometown. During his first supervised visit to my house after his release, he looked around the living room where federal agents had arrested him. I really thought I was helping you, he said quietly. I know you did. But Jake, you never once asked me if I needed help. You just assumed I was failing and took action based on that assumption. I couldn't believe my little sister was more successful than me. That was your problem to solve, not mine to accommodate. He nodded slowly. I destroyed everything for both of us because I couldn't handle the truth about who you really were. The story became something of a legend in federal law enforcement circles. Agent Martinez still uses it in training seminars about property fraud and family crimes. The case file is titled The Helpful Brother, and it's become a cautionary tale about how criminal behavior can be rationalized as assistance. But for me, it was a lesson about something deeper than crime and punishment. It was about the danger of family members who love you but refuse to see you clearly. Jake's crimes weren't really about the house or money. They were about his inability to accept that his assumptions about me were wrong. Sometimes the people who claim to know you best are the ones who refuse to acknowledge who you've actually become. And sometimes, protecting yourself from that willful blindness requires consequences that feel disproportionate to the underlying emotional crime. Jake learned that lesson through federal prison. My parents learned it through the shock of watching their son get arrested in their living room. And I learned it through the strange experience of having my competence validated by FBI agents instead of my own family. The house still stands in the same quiet neighborhood. The buyers, David and Michelle Parker, eventually found another home and sent me a card thanking me for cooperating with the investigation that returned their down payment. The real estate agent lost her license. The title company implemented new verification procedures. And Jake learned that assumptions about family members can become criminal acts when those assumptions drive you to forge signatures and steal federal property. I still get Christmas cards from Agent Martinez. Last year's card read, "Hope your family dynamics are less exciting these days." They are. But it took federal intervention to make that possible.
The Morgan family estate stood exactly as it had for the past century, 12 acres of manicured gardens surrounding a Georgian mansion that had graced countless architectural magazines. I parked my modest Volvo next to the line of luxury cars in the circular driveway, each one screaming old money and inherited privilege. My stepbrother Marcus's Porsche sat in Grandma's usual spot, a detail that would have infuriated her. But Grandma Alina wasn't here to object anymore. Her passing 2 weeks ago had set today's events in motion, though not in the way my step-family expected. Ms. Elizabeth, George, the elderly groundskeeper, touched his cap as I walked past. His knowing smile reminded me of all the afternoons I'd spent helping him tend the rose gardens while Marcus and my stepsister Victoria lounged by the pool, complaining about having to spend summers at boring old grandma's. The great oak door opened before I could reach for it. Hannah, the housekeeper who'd been here longer than I'd been alive, embraced me warmly. "Right on time, dear," she whispered. "They're all in the library, squabbling like vultures." I could hear them as I approached. The familiar voices of my step-family raised an argument. Dad had married Patricia when I was 10, bringing her 2 children into our quiet life. After his death 5 years later, they'd shown their true colors, slowly pushing me to the margins of the family while Patricia charmed her way into everyone's good graces. Everyone except Grandma Eleanor. "The summer house should be mine," Victoria's voice carried through the hallway. "I'm the one who spent every holiday with Grandma." "Only because you were banned from Monaco for that credit card scandal," I thought, remembering how Grandma had rolled her eyes at Victoria's sudden devotion. "The stock portfolio is the real prize," Marcus countered. And as the only one with an MBA, I had to bite back a laugh. His MBA had come from a diploma mill, bought with family money after he failed out of 3 legitimate universities. But that didn't stop him from calling himself a financial genius at every opportunity. The library doors were open, revealing the assembled family in all their entitled glory. Patricia perched on Grandma's favorite armchair like she already owned it, wearing the kind of black dress that was more fashion statement than mourning. Victoria sprawled on the leather sofa, scrolling through her phone while simultaneously arguing about her claim to the property. Marcus paced by the fireplace, his expensive shoes scuffing the antique rug Grandma had brought back from Morocco. Mr. Sullivan, the family lawyer, sat quietly at Grandma's desk, watching the performance with an expression I knew well. He'd called me last night. "You'll want to be there for this, Elizabeth." Eleanor made sure of that. I stepped into the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What is she doing here?" Victoria didn't bother looking up from her phone. "Elizabeth." Patricia's voice dripped false concern. "Darling, this is really just for family." "I am family," I said quietly. "Grandma Alina was my father's mother." "Yes, but..." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Given the circumstances." "Given that you're not a blood Morgan," Marcus cut in, moving to stand between me and Mr. Sullivan. "This is for real family only." He stepped forward, his 6-foot frame trying to intimidate my 5'4". "We wouldn't want to waste your time. I'm sure you have some little apartment to get back to." The apartment he was referring to was actually a penthouse in the city's most exclusive building, not that they knew that. They all thought I was struggling, living off my modest teaching salary. They had no idea about the tech company I'd built, the investments I'd made, or most importantly, the conversation I'd had with Grandma Alina 6 months ago. Actually, I started, but Marcus was already pushing me back through the doorway. "This is for real family only," he sneered, grabbing the heavy library doors. "Go grade some papers, or whatever it is you do." The doors shut in my face with a decisive click. I smoothed my simple black dress, channel, though they'd never recognize it as such, and took a seat in the lobby's window alcove. Through the leaded glass, I could see the rose gardens Grandma and I had tended together, the bench where she'd sat me down last spring with a conspiratorial gleam in her eye. "They think I'm getting senile," she'd said, sipping her tea, playing the doddering old woman while they circle like sharks. "Let them think that. We'll show them what a Morgan woman can do." I checked my watch. The Morgan family crest on its face caught the light. Grandma's graduation gift to me, along with the seed money for my company. The only one of them worth anything, she declared, watching me accept my MBA from Stanford, while Marcus slept off a hangover and Victoria shopped in Paris. My phone buzzed. A message from my CFO. "Morgan estate transfer complete. All paperwork filed." I smiled, settling back to wait. In the library, I could hear Marcus starting his practice speech about his plans for modernizing the estate. Victoria's whining about her emotional connection to the summer house. Patricia's smooth assertions about honoring Eleanor's wishes. Then suddenly, silence. Mr. Sullivan must have opened the envelope. The screaming started exactly as I'd expected. Victoria's high-pitched wail, Marcus's bellow of rage, Patricia's shocked gasp. "She did leave again? This can't be legal. 6 months ago, she sold everything 6 months as ago." The library doors flew open. Marcus stormed out, face purple with rage, waving a document. "This is impossible. Grandma would never." He froze, seeing me still seated calmly in the alcove. "Hello, Marcus," I said softly. "Ready to discuss the new rental terms for your wing of the house. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just owning the estate, it's watching them realize who really owns them." The library had erupted into chaos. Victoria paced frantically, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Grandma Alina had restored herself. Patricia sat frozen in what was no longer her chair, her perfectly maintained facade cracking. And Marcus looked like he might actually explode. "Mr. Sullivan," he sputtered, "this has to be a mistake. Grandma wasn't. She couldn't. Your grandmother," Mr. Sullivan said calmly, "was of perfectly sound mind when she sold the estate 6 months ago. In fact, she insisted on a complete psychological evaluation before proceeding, knowing you might try to contest it." I walked back into the library, taking my rightful place behind Grandma's desk. The leather chair still smelled faintly of her signature perfume. 6 months ago, Victoria whispered, sinking onto the sofa, when she was supposedly getting confused about her medications. When you were all too busy planning how to spend your inheritance to notice she was planning something of her own, I finished for her. Patricia found her voice first. But the money. Surely she didn't. I mean, the estate must have sold for millions. 27 million, to be exact, Mr. Sullivan supplied, which Mrs. Eleanor Morgan immediately reinvested in her granddaughter's technology company, Morgan Innovations. Another shocked silence. Your what?" Marcus turned to me, his face a fascinating shade of purple. I opened my laptop, bringing up the company website. Morgan Innovations, currently valued at just over $3 billion. We specialize in AI-driven security systems and sustainable energy solutions. I smiled. Grandma was our biggest investor and most enthusiastic board member. But you're a teacher. Victoria shrieked. I teach one advanced computer science seminar at MIT. I corrected. As a favor to my alma mater. The rest of my time is spent running my company. The company that now owns this estate, the summer house, and most of the Morgan family holdings. Patricia stood shakily. This isn't possible. You've tricked her somehow. Manipulated her. Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat. I have here a video recording of Mrs. Morgan explaining her decisions. She insisted on making it, again anticipating your reactions. He pressed play on his tablet. Grandma Aliner's face filled the screen, as sharp and elegant as ever. If you're watching this, I'm dead, and my darling vultures are trying to contest my final act of business. She smiled her infamous smile, the one that had terrorized social climbers for decades. To my step-grandchildren, Marcus and Victoria, you never understood what the Morgan name truly meant. You thought it was about money, about status. You spent years pretending to care about me while planning how to spend my fortune. Victoria flinched. Marcus looked away. To Patricia, you married my son for his name and stayed for my money. Don't bother denying it. I've known since you tried to access my accounts during his funeral. Patricia sank back into her chair, her face ashen. But Elizabeth, Grandma's voice softened. Elizabeth understood. She saw the Morgan legacy for what it was. Not just wealth, but innovation, creation, the drive to build something meaningful. While you all were lounging by my pool and planning my death, she was building an empire. In secret, just like I did 60 years ago, when everyone said a woman couldn't run a business. I remembered that conversation, late one night in her study. How she'd recognized the code I was working on, understood its potential. How she'd looked at me and seen not just her granddaughter, but a kindred spirit. So yes, Grandma continued, I sold her everything. Not gave, sold. Because Elizabeth understands that true value isn't in what you're given, but in what you earn. She paid full market price, through her own company, with her own money. Money she made while you were all sneering at her little teaching job. The recording ended. In the silence that followed, you could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking away the seconds of their entitlement. Now, I said, pulling out a stack of folders, let's discuss your living arrangements. Our what? Marcus's voice cracked. Your rental agreements. While I have no intention of evicting you immediately, you'll understand that as the new owner, I need proper contracts in place. Market rate rent, of course. Market rate? Victoria looked faint. But I don't have. An income? I finished. Yes, I know. Fortunately, Morgan Innovations is always hiring. Your resume is a bit thin, but I'm sure we can find you an entry-level position, something where you can learn actual skills. Marcus drew himself up, trying to regain some dignity. Now see here, this is our home. No, I cut him off. This was Grandma's home, which she sold to me. Your sense of entitlement doesn't constitute ownership. I opened the first folder. Now about that MBA you claim to have. The color drained from his face. Fraud is such an ugly word, I continued. I prefer to think of it as an opportunity for growth. You can either sign a legitimate rental agreement and accept a position in our corporate compliance department, where you'll learn about actual business ethics. Or you can try explaining your fake credentials to the board of your investment firm. Your choice. Patricia stood up, smoothing her designer dress. Elizabeth, surely we can discuss this reasonably. As family. Family? I looked up at her. Like when you canceled my college fund after Dad died? Or when you told the country club I was unfortunately unstable when I started my company instead of joining your social circle? She sat back down. Mr. Sullivan, I said, please distribute the rental agreements. They have until Friday to sign or vacate. Victoria burst into tears. Real ones this time, not the calculated sobs she usually employed. Marcus looked like he was having trouble breathing. Patricia just sat there, probably calculating how many of her society friends would hear about this. Oh, and one more thing, I added, picking up Grandma's favorite fountain pen. The staff, Hannah, George, everyone you've been treating like servants instead of the family they actually are, they all get to stay, with significant raises and full benefits. Through the window, I could see George tending the roses we planted together. Hannah appeared in the doorway, carrying a tea service, Grandma's best china. Your usual Earl Grey, Miss Elizabeth? She asked, her eyes twinkling. Yes, thank you, Hannah. I sat back in what was now my chair, in what was now my library, in what had always been my true home. I believe we have some long overdue changes to discuss, because sometimes the best revenge isn't just taking back what's yours, it's using it to build something better than they could ever imagine. 3 months after the inheritance revelation, the Morgan estate had transformed. The East Wing, once Marcus's private party haven, now housed Morgan Innovations' new AI research center. The pool house where Victoria had spent countless hours sunbathing had become a state-of-the-art conference facility. And Grandma Aliner's beloved gardens had been expanded, with a new sustainable greenhouse that powered half the property. I sat in the library, my library now, reviewing the latest changes when Hannah brought in my morning coffee. The contractors finished the solar installation, she reported, setting down the cup. And Miss Victoria actually arrived on time for her training session today. That made me look up. Really? How's she doing? Sarah in HR says she's showing surprising aptitude for project coordination. Once she stopped complaining about having to work, that is. I smiled, remembering Victoria's face when I'd explained that her new entry-level position included managing the estate's renovation projects. You want me to work with contractors? She's learning, I said, taking a sip of coffee. How's Marcus adjusting to the compliance department? Hannah's eyes twinkled. Well, after he accidentally exposed his own fake MBA during his first audit, he's been surprisingly dedicated to understanding actual business ethics. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Marcus, who'd spent years bragging about his business acumen, was now learning the basics from entry-level compliance training. My phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Sullivan. Patricia's here. Says it's urgent. I sighed. Sent her in. Patricia entered looking distinctly less polished than usual. The designer outfits had been replaced by something more practical, and her perfect manicure showed signs of actual work. Elizabeth, she began, then stopped, taking in the changes to the library. The antique furniture remained. Grandma's taste had always been impeccable, but now it shared space with cutting-edge technology. Holographic displays showed real-time business data, while the old oak shelves held both leather-bound classics and digital archives. The country club board meeting was this morning, she said finally. Ah, So that's what this was about. They're revoking my membership. Her voice cracked slightly. Apparently, living in rental property doesn't meet their ownership requirements. How unfortunate, I said mildly, remembering all the times she'd used that same club to exclude me. Though I hear the public golf course is quite nice. Elizabeth, please. She sank into a chair. I know I've made mistakes. Mistakes? I set down my coffee, like canceling my college fund, or telling everyone I was mentally unstable when I started my company? Or perhaps you mean the mistake of trying to access Grandma's accounts during my father's funeral. She flinched at each example. I was wrong. About everything. About you. Yes, I agreed. You were. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she continued. But I'd like to understand. How did you do it? Build all this while we thought you were just a teacher? Just the quiet stepdaughter you could safely ignore. I stood, walking to the window. The garden below was full of activity. Employees enjoying the new outdoor workspace. Researchers discussing projects among the roses Grandma and I had planted. I learned from Grandma Eleanor, I said finally. Not just about business, but about power. Real power isn't in showing off or pushing others down. It's in building something meaningful while everyone underestimates you. She always saw something in you, Patricia admitted. I used to be jealous of how much time you spent together. She saw herself. I turned back to face her. A woman who built an empire while society told her to just be decorative. Did you know she bought her first company using money she made selling her own jewelry? Her husband, Grandpa Morgan, thought she was just maintaining her social connections, but she was actually building a network of investors. Patricia looked thoughtful. I never knew that. No one did. That was the point. I sat back down, pulling up some files on my tablet. Speaking of points, I assume you're here about more than just the country club? She straightened in her chair. Yes, I'd like to work. A real job, not just charity boards and social committees. That I hadn't expected. The renovation project, she continued. I've been watching Victoria learn about it, and I have experience with historical properties. From all those museum boards I sat on, I thought maybe. I studied her carefully. The perfectly curated facade had cracked, revealing something almost genuine. The Heritage Conservation Team does need a coordinator, I said slowly. Someone who understands both historical value and modern functionality. But I held up a hand as hope flickered across her face. It's not a glamorous position. No assistant, no expense account. Just hard work preserving what matters while building something new. Like what you've done here, she gestured to the library. Exactly. I pulled up a contract. You'll report to Victoria. 2. Victoria? She blinked. She's earned it. Turns out when you actually give people a chance to prove themselves, they sometimes surprise you. I sent the contract to her email. Take the weekend to think about it. After she left, Hannah reappeared with fresh coffee. That was generous of you, she said. We'll see if she actually takes it. I checked my schedule. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Is everything ready in the new conference room? Yes, though Marcus is nervous about presenting his first compliance report. I smiled. Good. A little nervousness keeps people honest. The estate hummed with activity as I walked to the conference room. Employees, many of them local kids who'd never dreamed of working in tech, collaborated in spaces that had once hosted only idle gossip and social climbing. The old Morgan money had transformed into something productive, innovative, meaningful. In the hall, I passed the portrait of Grandma Alina in her prime, elegant, sophisticated, and secretly powerful. The artist had captured the gleam in her eye, that hint of hidden strength that most people missed. My phone buzzed again, a message from my CFO. Stock hit another record high. The Sustainable Energy Division is exceeding all projections. I typed back, "Good. Implement the employee stock option plan we discussed. Time to share the success." Victoria appeared around the corner, looking surprisingly professional in a business suit that probably cost less than her old handbags. "Monthly project review is ready," she reported. The Heritage team hit all their targets, and the new greenhouse design won that sustainability award. "Good work," I said, watching her try to hide her pride. "How's Marcus doing with his presentation?" Terrified, she smiled slightly. "But he actually understands the material now, and he hasn't mentioned his fake MBA in weeks." We entered the conference room together, the same room where they'd once tried to exclude me from the inheritance meeting. Now it was filled with actual business leaders, innovators, and employees who'd earned their positions. Marcus stood at the podium, wearing a modest suit and a nervous expression. Patricia sat quietly in the back, taking notes about the historical features we were preserving. And through the windows, George tended the gardens where Grandma and I had planned all this years ago. Ready to begin? I took my place at the head of the table, because sometimes the best revenge isn't just succeeding, it's creating a legacy that transforms everyone it touches, even those who never thought they needed transformation. And as I looked around at what the Morgan estate had become, I knew Grandma Alina would be proud. Not just of me, but of how her final chess move had forced everyone to become better versions of themselves. The antique clock chimed 10, and I called the meeting to order. After all, we had an empire to run, the right way, this time. The day my family disowned me, it was raining. I remember that detail clearly. The way the water streamed down the windows of Harrison Industries' executive conference room, while inside, my father's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Incompetent," he shouted, slamming a stack of papers onto the polished table. "Do you have any idea what your mistake could have cost us?" I stood there, 22 years old and fresh out of business school, trying not to cry. "Dad, I can fix it. The contract isn't final yet." "Fix it?" My older brother Michael's laugh was cruel. "You nearly sold our shipping division for half its value. There is no fixing that kind of stupidity." The mistake they were talking about was a draft contract I'd prepared for the sale of Harrison Maritime, one of our smaller divisions. I'd accidentally used outdated valuation figures, ones that didn't include our recent fleet expansion. The error was caught before any real damage was done, but to hear my family tell it, I'd nearly destroyed a century of Harrison family business. "I trusted you with this," my father continued, his voice dropping to something even worse than yelling: disappointment. "I gave you a chance to prove yourself, and this is how you repay that trust." I tried to explain that I'd been working 80-hour weeks, that I'd been trying to handle both the maritime deal and the new tech acquisition they dumped on my desk. But excuses didn't matter in the Harrison family. Results were all they cared about. "Jack," my mother's voice from the doorway made us all turn. She stood there in her perfect Channel suit, looking more like a CEO than the socialite she pretended to be. "The board is waiting." My father straightened his tie. "We'll finish this discussion later." But we didn't. That evening, I was called to my father's study, the room where 3 generations of Harrison men had made the decisions that built our family empire. The leather-bound books and old oil paintings seemed to watch disapprovingly as my father delivered his verdict. "You're done here," he said without preamble. "The board has lost confidence in your judgment. Your position at Harrison Industries is terminated, effective immediately." I felt like I'd been punched. "Dad, please. It was one mistake. A mistake we can't afford." He wouldn't even look at me. "You'll receive 6 months severance. After that, you're on your own." "You're firing me? I'm your daughter." Which is exactly why this hurts so much. He finally met my eyes. "You're not just an employee, Emma. You're a Harrison. We trusted you to live up to that name, and you failed." My mother's voice came from behind me. I hadn't even heard her enter. "We've arranged a position for you at your uncle's firm in Seattle, far enough away that this incident won't reflect badly on the family." I turned to face her, shocked. "You want me to leave New York?" "Want has nothing to do with it." Her perfectly painted lips barely moved. "The decision has been made. Your flight leaves tomorrow morning. And if I refuse—" My father's voice hardened. "Then you're on your own completely. No severance, no connections, no family support. Your choice." I looked between them, the parents who had pushed me toward business school, who had drilled the importance of the Harrison legacy into me since childhood. Now they were casting me aside over one mistake. "Some choice," I whispered. Only one person in the family stood up for me that night. My grandfather, Thomas Harrison Teal, the man who had turned our regional shipping company into a global corporate empire. He stormed into my father's study just as I was leaving, his weathered face dark with anger. "Jack, you fool," he growled at my father. "You have no idea what you're throwing away." But my father stood firm. "Dad, the board has already—" "The board?" Grandpa's laugh was bitter. "You mean those yes-men you surrounded yourself with? The ones who forgot what built this company in the first place." I had never seen my grandfather so angry. He turned to me, his expression softening. "Emma, dear, come stay with me. We'll sort this out." But I was already shaking my head. The humiliation was too fresh, the pain too raw. "No, Grandpa, they've made their choice." I left that night, ignoring my mother's carefully planned Seattle arrangement. The 6 months severance would be enough to start over somewhere, anywhere that wasn't under my family's shadow. What I didn't know then was that my grandfather had already set something in motion, something that wouldn't be revealed until 10 years later, when his will would turn the Harrison family upside down. That night, I checked into a hotel using my personal credit card, soon to be my only credit card, once my corporate accounts were frozen. I sat on the generic floral bedspread and opened my laptop, staring at the draft contract that had supposedly destroyed my future. Except, something wasn't right. I had worked on dozens of contracts during my brief time at Harrison Industries. I knew my own writing style, my own formatting preferences. This contract was different. Small things, spacing, font choices, even some of the language, were off. With trembling fingers, I pulled up the original file from my secured backup drive. The differences were subtle but unmistakable. Someone had altered my work before it reached the board. Someone had wanted me to fail. I thought about my brother Michael's smirk, the way he had been so quick to condemn my mistake, the way he had positioned himself as the only competent heir to the Harrison empire. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head, "You have no idea what you're throwing away." But maybe I did. Maybe I understood exactly what had happened, and why. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain. 10 years ago, my great-grandfather had passed control of Harrison Industries to my grandfather instead of his older brother, a decision that had shocked the business world. History, it seemed, had a way of repeating itself in our family. My phone buzzed. A text from my grandfather. "Nothing is what it seems, Emma. Watch. Wait. Learn." I took a deep breath, making a decision that would shape the next decade of my life. I would not run to Seattle. I would not fade quietly into obscurity. I would watch. I would wait. And most importantly, I would learn exactly how deep this betrayal went. What my family didn't know, what even my grandfather couldn't have predicted, was that their mistake was about to turn into their worst nightmare. Because the contract I had actually prepared, the one that had been altered without my knowledge, it contained a hidden clause, a small but crucial detail that would only become apparent years later. A detail that would give me control of Harrison Maritime's most valuable assets, right when the family needed them most. I smiled at my reflection in the Rain Street window. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about failure. Instead, they were about to learn one about underestimating the wrong person. My grandfather's next text arrived just as I was falling asleep. "Remember, dear, in business, as in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board, even if some fools think she's just a pawn." I didn't understand his message then, but I would. Oh, how I would. 10 years is a long time to wait for revenge. But my grandfather taught me that patience was worth more than gold in the business world, and he was right. I spent the first year building my cover, a small consulting firm in Boston, far enough from New York to avoid family scrutiny, but close enough to keep tabs on Harrison Industries. My grandfather's cryptic messages continued, each one teaching me something new about our family empire. "Watch the shipping manifests for the Singapore route," he would text. Or, "Pay attention to the Anderson merger terms." Small breadcrumbs that helped me understand the bigger picture. The mistake that got me fired? It wasn't just about the maritime division. That contract had been a test. One designed to show the board that I wasn't fit to lead. What my brother Michael hadn't realized was that I had left my own test hidden in the fine print. Clause 23.4, subsection B, buried in the technical specifications. In the event of division restructuring or transfer of assets, original signatory maintains first right of refusal on all Pacific Rim shipping routes and associated infrastructure. A clause that would mean nothing for years, until Harrison Industries decided to restructure their entire shipping operation, which, according to my grandfather's intelligence, was exactly what they were planning. I built my new life carefully, layer by layer. My consulting firm, Phoenix Maritime Solutions, specialized in shipping logistics and port management. We were small but efficient, earning a reputation for solving complex problems that bigger firms couldn't handle. My brother Michael, meanwhile, was living the life of the chosen heir. I watched from afar as he appeared in business magazines, accepting awards and making grand promises about Harrison Industries' future. Our parents beamed in every photo, the perfect corporate family. Only my grandfather seemed to see through the facade. "Your brother's latest acquisition is built on sand," he told me during one of our secret meetings, always in small cafes far from Manhattan. "He's leveraging the company's future on short-term gains." I nodded, stirring my coffee. "The Asian expansion?" "Smoke and mirrors." Grandpa's eyes twinkled. "He's using the maritime division's assets as collateral, thinking they're worth more than they are. Because he never understood the real value was in the routes, not the ships," I finished. "Exactly. He reached into his briefcase. Now, about those route licenses coming up for renewal. We spent the next hour reviewing documents that would have made my father's blood pressure spike. My grandfather wasn't just keeping me informed. He was teaching me how to take back what was rightfully mine. The years passed. I grew Phoenix Maritime Solutions into a respected name in the industry, though I stayed carefully out of the spotlight. My employees were handpicked, loyal, and well compensated for their discretion. None of them knew about my connection to Harrison Industries. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. The last man I trusted with my real identity had run straight to my brother with the information. After that, I kept my personal life as carefully controlled as my business one. My parents sent obligatory Christmas cards to my Boston address, cards I never responded to. Each year, they included a note about how well Michael was doing, how the company was thriving under his leadership. I filed each card away in a folder labeled Motivation. Then, 3 years ago, everything started changing. The cracks in Michael's perfect facade began to show. First came the whispers about missed payments to major suppliers. Then rumors of delayed shipments and angry clients. Harrison Industries' stock price, while still strong, showed troubling fluctuations. Your brother mortgaged the company's future, my grandfather explained during what would turn out to be our last meeting. Now those bills are coming due. He looked tired that day, more so than usual. I should have recognized it as a warning sign. The board is starting to ask questions, he continued. About the maritime division especially. The restructuring plan. Will trigger my clause, I finished, if they try to sell off or reorganize the shipping routes. You'll have first right of refusal. He smiled proudly. The clause they never noticed, hidden in the contract they used to destroy you. 2 months later, my grandfather had a stroke. The doctors said it was quick, painless. The official announcement praised him as a titan of industry, the man who built Harrison Industries into a global power. I attended the funeral, of course, standing in the back of the church, watching my family play their roles of grieving heirs. Michael gave a touching eulogy about learning business at our grandfather's knee. I nearly laughed out loud at that. The only thing Michael had learned from Grandpa was how to take credit for other people's work. My parents saw me, but didn't approach. Maybe they were ashamed. More likely, they were worried I would cause a scene. I left before the reception, driving straight to my lawyer's office. Your grandfather's will reading is scheduled for next week, she informed me. He was very specific about the timing. I nodded, unsurprised. Everything about my grandfather was specific and carefully planned. All major shareholders and family members are required to attend in person, she continued. No proxies allowed. Again, typical Grandpa. He would want everyone there to witness whatever he had planned. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. I reviewed every document, every contract, every piece of information my grandfather had shared over the past decade. Phoenix Maritime Solutions was positioned perfectly, cash reserves high, credit lines secure, relationships with key players solidified. The morning of the will reading, I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my entire wardrobe from my Harrison Industries days. My hair was elegantly styled, my makeup perfect. No one looking at me would see the scared 22-year-old who had fled in the rain 10 years ago. As I drove to the lawyer's office, my phone buzzed with an alert. Harrison Industries stock had dropped another 2 points in early trading. Rumors were swirling about their ability to meet next quarter's obligations. The timing, like everything else about this situation, was perfect. I parked my car and checked my reflection one last time. In my purse was a copy of the original maritime contract, the one with my hidden clause. In my briefcase were documents proving every mistake, every misstep, every bad decision my brother had made while playing corporate emperor. And in my head was 10 years' worth of knowledge about Harrison Industries operations. Knowledge that was about to become very, very valuable. I stepped into the elevator, watching the floor numbers climb. My grandfather's last text message played in my mind. The game is won before the first piece moves. The doors opened onto a floor full of familiar faces frozen in shock. My father dropped his coffee cup. My mother's perfect mask cracked. And my brother Michael, the golden child, the chosen heir, turned white as a sheet. "Hello, family," I said calmly. "Shall we begin?" The conference room at Caldwell and Associates law firm crackled with tension. My family had arranged themselves exactly as I expected. Michael at the head of the table, our parents flanking him like royal advisors. The board members filled the remaining seats, all carefully avoiding my gaze. Mr. Caldwell, my grandfather's personal attorney for over 40 years, cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I should note that Thomas was very specific about the order in which his will should be read. He left detailed instructions." Yes, Michael interrupted. "Can we get on with it? Some of us have a company to run." I bit back a smile. In a few minutes, that statement would be hilariously ironic. Mr. Caldwell opened an envelope, his expression carefully neutral. "Very well. This is the last will and testament of Thomas Harrison AI. The first few items were standard: personal belongings to various family members, charitable donations, arrangements for his staff." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief when he left her his antique jewelry collection. My father nodded approvingly at the size of the charitable endowments. Then came the part everyone was waiting for. Regarding Harrison Industries, Mr. Caldwell paused, adjusting his glasses. "The situation is complex." Michael leaned forward. "Complex how?" The succession plan was clear. As CEO, as interim CEO, Mr. Caldwell corrected. "Your position, like many things, was temporary pending the reading of this will." The room went silent. I watched the color drain from my brother's face as Mr. Caldwell continued reading. "To my grandson, Michael, I leave these words of wisdom. Power without understanding is like a ship without a rudder. You sought control, but never learned why our company worked. You chased growth without appreciating the foundation that supported it. And most tragically, you betrayed your own sister to advance yourself." Michael shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous. I didn't." "Sit down," Mr. Caldwell said firmly. "There's more." He pulled out another document, one I recognized, my original maritime contract. 10 years ago, a contract was deliberately altered to discredit Emma Harrison and force her removal from the company. I have here the original document, along with proof of who made those alterations. My father's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. "That's ancient history. The board's decision was based on falsified evidence," Mr. Caldwell finished. "Evidence that Michael provided after tampering with his sister's work." The board members began murmuring among themselves. I noticed several of them eyeing the exits. Furthermore, Mr. Caldwell continued, "The original contract contained a clause that becomes particularly relevant now." "Emma, would you like to explain?" All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, smoothing my suit jacket. Clause 23.4, subsection B gives the original signatory, me, first right of refusal on all Pacific Rim shipping routes and associated infrastructure in the event of division restructuring. Which means nothing, Michael snapped. We're not restructuring the maritime division. Actually, I pulled out my phone, displaying the morning stock alerts. You are. The Singapore deal you announced last week? The one meant to save the company from the debt you've accumulated. It can't happen without restructuring the shipping operations. Which means you need my approval. I finished. And you won't get. The room erupted in chaos. Board members were already on their phones, likely calling their lawyers. My mother had actual tears running down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. My father looked like he might have a stroke. Mr. Caldwell raised his voice over the din. There's more. From his briefcase, he produced a thick folder. Thomas Harrison's majority shareholding in Harrison Industries is hereby transferred in its entirety to his granddaughter, Emma Harrison. The silence that followed was deafening. Additionally, he continued, all voting rights associated with the family trust shares are to be exercised by Emma Harrison, effective immediately. Michael collapsed back into his chair. This can't be legal. Dad, do something. But our father was staring at another document Mr. Caldwell had placed on the table, a detailed report of Harrison Industries' finances under Michael's leadership. Your grandfather spent the last 10 years documenting every mistake, every poor decision, every instance of mismanagement. Mr. Caldwell explained. He worked closely with Emma to understand the true state of the company while you were all believing your own press releases. I stepped forward, placing my own folder on the table. Phoenix Maritime Solutions, my company, has spent years building relationships with the clients you've been neglecting. We've secured contracts you didn't even know were available. And now you own us, my father whispered. No, I corrected. I own what's mine. What should have been mine 10 years ago, before you chose to believe lies over truth? Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. There's one final item. A letter Thomas wanted read aloud. He opened a sealed envelope and began reading. To my family. Power doesn't come from titles or boardroom theatrics. It comes from understanding your business, your people, and most importantly, yourself. 10 years ago, you cast aside the one person who truly understood what made Harrison Industries work. You chose flash over substance, greed over growth, betrayal over loyalty. Emma didn't just survive your betrayal, she thrived despite it. While you were all watching Michael play CEO, she was learning every aspect of this industry. She built her own success while watching you destroy your inheritance. Consider this my final lesson in business. True leadership isn't about who can grab power fastest. It's about who can wield it wisely. Emma, the company is yours. Make it what it should have been all along. To the rest of you, learn from this if you can. With love and disappointment in equal measure, Thomas Harrison A.E. Michael was the first to break the silence. You planned this. All of it. You and Grandpa. No, I cut him off. You planned this the day you decided to forge documents to destroy my career. Grandpa and I just made sure you'd face the consequences. I turned to the board members. A car is waiting outside to take you to Phoenix Maritime's offices. My team will brief you on the restructuring plan we've developed. Those who wish to remain with the company will have the opportunity to prove their value. Those who don't, I smiled. Well, I hear my brother will be looking for work soon. You can't just walk in here and take over, my father protested weakly. Actually, that's exactly what I'm doing. I gathered my documents. The shareholders' meeting is in 1 hour. I suggest you all decide whose side you're on before then. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Michael? Clear out your office by 5. I'm moving in tomorrow. The next few weeks were exactly what you'd expect when a decade of mismanagement comes to light. The press had a field day with the story. Harrison Harris returns. The greatest corporate comeback in history was my personal favorite headline. The shareholders, seeing the detailed plans I'd developed with my grandfather, overwhelmingly supported the transition. Harrison Industries' stock price stabilized, then began to climb as we implemented changes. Michael, predictably, tried to sue. His case fell apart when our father, finally facing the truth about his chosen heir, testified about the document forgery from 10 years ago. My mother attempted reconciliation in her own way. Lunch invitations, shopping offers, suggestions that we should all just move forward as a family. I declined every invitation. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. 1 month after taking control, I stood in my grandfather's old office, my office now, looking out over the city. On my desk sat the contract that had started everything, framed as a reminder that sometimes losing is just winning in disguise. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a photo of my grandfather, taken the day he caught Michael altering my work. He'd kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment. Below the photo was a message, scheduled to be sent after his death. The Queen has taken her throne. Checkmate, my dear. Checkmate. I smiled, touching the frame of that old contract. The family that cast me out had thought they were ending my story. Instead, they had only written its beginning. And now, finally, they understood exactly what they had thrown away.